The final days of a legend don't always come with loud headlines. Sometimes they arrive quietly, almost unnoticed, until the silence becomes impossible to ignore. And that's exactly how the story unfolded around David Allan Coe, a man whose voice once echoed through outlaw country, now remembered in a very different tone. Because this wasn't just about the end of a career. It was about the final chapter of a life that never followed the rules. David Allan Coe passed away at the age of 85 after a period of declining health, according to circulating reports and fan discussions. While official details about his passing remain limited, those close to his circle suggested that his final days were spent away from the spotlight, in a quieter environment than the one he dominated for decades. And that contrast is what makes this moment feel so heavy. Because for years, Coe represented rebellion, unpredictability, and raw storytelling in country music. His songs weren't polished for mainstream approval. They were real, rough, and often controversial. But in the end, the story slowed down. And that's where things get emotional. In the days leading up to his passing, those who followed his journey closely began noticing subtle signs. Fewer appearances, less communication, a noticeable absence from the kind of presence he once maintained with fans and collaborators. At first, it didn't seem unusual. After all, stepping back is something many artists eventually do. But then the silence stayed. And slowly, it turned into something else. But that's not the whole story. Because what truly brought attention back to his legacy wasn't just the news of his final days, it was the tribute that followed. Rodney Crowell, a respected voice in country music himself, delivered a reflection that many are calling one of the most powerful responses to Coe's passing. And his words carried weight, not just because of who he is, but because of what he chose to say. Crowell didn't focus on controversy. He didn't highlight the complicated parts of Coe's career that often made headlines. Instead, he spoke about influence, about authenticity, about the raw honesty that defined Coe's music, even when it made people uncomfortable. And that perspective changed the tone of the entire conversation. Because suddenly, the focus shifted from debate to legacy. Crowell described Coe as someone who lived his art without compromise, a storyteller who refused to soften his edges just to fit expectations. And whether people agreed with him or not, they couldn't ignore him. And that's what made him unforgettable. But here, where things get even more interesting. Because alongside the tribute, fans began revisiting Coe's music with a different mindset. Songs that once felt rebellious now felt reflective. Lyrics that once sounded confrontational now carried a sense of history. And in that shift, a new layer of understanding began to form. Because sometimes, it takes the end of a story to fully understand what it meant. As more tributes surfaced, a pattern became clear. Fellow musicians, fans, and industry figures weren't just remembering Coe for his image. They were remembering him for his impact. The way he shaped outlaw country. The way he influenced artists who came after him. The way he stayed true to his voice, even when it cost him mainstream acceptance. And that consistency became part of his identity. But that identity was never simple. And that's what makes this moment so complex. Because David Allan Coe was never just one thing. He was admired by some, questioned by others, respected across the board. And in the end, he left behind a legacy that refuses to be simplified. As conversations continue, many are reflecting not just on his music, but on what his journey represents. A career built outside the lines, a life lived without filtering every decision through public approval. And that kind of path always leaves a strong impression, whether positive, controversial, or somewhere in between. Meanwhile, Rodney Crowell's tribute continues to circulate, resonating with those who understand the deeper layers of country music history. His words didn't try to rewrite Coe's story. They simply acknowledged it, fully, honestly, and that honesty is what made the tribute stand out. Because in moments like this, people don't just want praise. They want truth. And that's exactly what was offered. As the final days of David Allan Coe are remembered, one thing becomes clear. This wasn't the quiet ending of a forgotten figure. It was the closing chapter of a voice that refused to fade quietly, even in silence. And as fans continue to revisit his music, share his lyrics, and debate his legacy, the story doesn't really end. It evolves, because artists like him don't disappear. They remain in every note, every word, and every reaction they ever created. And maybe that's the real meaning behind Rodney Crowell's tribute. Not just a goodbye, but a reminder that some voices never truly stop being heard.